Hi, I'm Eva Pilgrim. Thanks for streaming with us. The high-profile Sean Diddy Combs sex trafficking and racketeering trial now in its final stage. Prosecutors presenting their closing arguments today, this after more than 6 weeks of testimony, some of it very graphic. The jury hearing from more than 30 witnesses, including Combs' ex-girlfriends, former assistants, male escorts, security guards, even another rapper and rival. The prosecutor in closing calling Combs the leader of a criminal enterprise who didn't take no for an answer, saying Combs, quote, forced and manipulated Cassie Ventura and Jane to have sex with escorts for his own entertainment and used power, violence, and fear to get what he wanted. Combs is the only defendant, but the prosecutor told the jury he did not act alone, saying, quote, he managed to do this for 2 decades because he used his money, his influence, and his inner circle to cover up his crimes. It's his kingdom. Everyone was there to serve him. Combs' children were in the courtroom today, including his 19-year-old twin daughters, who haven't been there since the first days of the trial. Combs has pleaded not guilty to all charges. If convicted, he faces the possibility of life in prison. Later in the show, we have YouTube star Tisa Tells joining us live to talk about the commentary surrounding this high-profile trial. But first, let's begin tonight with ABC News Chief Investigative Correspondent Aaron Katersky live outside the federal courthouse here in Manhattan. And Aaron, prosecutors gave their closing arguments to the jury. What was it like inside the courtroom today?
First of all, Eva, it was packed. For the first time since the beginning of the trial, every member of the Combs family was there, all 6 of his children, his mom. They all crowded into the row designated for family. At one point, Sean Combs even seemed to be, saying squished together a little bit to make room. But there were attorneys for some of the witnesses. The U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Jay Clayton, was in the room to hear prosecutors give their closing statement. So it was packed. But for the start anyway, Sean Combs appeared pretty relaxed. He walked into the courtroom, he put his hand over his heart, a gesture toward his family, and he's been reading a book, The Power of Positive Thinking.
I'm curious, how was Combs? You mentioned it a little bit there. Did he interact any more with his family? What was his interactions with his attorneys like today?
A bit with the family. He did scribble a number of notes during the prosecutor's summation, writing them on little Post-its, handing them over to his attorneys. But at one point, I thought it was interesting. He sat far back, his chair pushed far back from the table, away from his usual confiding position with his attorneys, Eva, and had his head down, whether in thought or reading notes, but it seemed a moment where he might have been, as much as he can be these days, by himself.
I'm curious, Aaron, how long did the government's closing arguments take today?
It was almost 5 hours, and I have to say, it did not necessarily feel like it. The prosecutor's presentation for the last 7 weeks has been rather sprawling, and at times it felt disjointed. Witnesses testified that may or may not have had anything to do with one another. Today was the chance for prosecutors to try to tie all of that together, and all of the evidence about hundreds of freak-offs that the jury heard about, saw graphic footage of, and today prosecutors said a single freak-off is enough. That the jury just had to find that sex trafficking elements were met by prosecutors one time in order to convict.
Can you tell us more about the prosecutor who delivered today's closing arguments?
Christy Slavic is an experienced federal prosecutor. She actually has a background in gangs and violent crime. And I think of the 6, she may have been one of the more effective during examinations of witnesses, prepared, methodical, and that was, I think, the characterization today, a methodical, what they hope is a devastating portrait of Sean Combs, not only as a sex trafficker, but someone who led a criminal enterprise with a cadre of loyal lieutenants. It was his kingdom, she said. They were there to say yes, because she said over and over in a rhetorical flourish, Sean Combs would not take no for an answer.
The defense will have their turn tomorrow. What can we expect from the defense for their closing arguments?
Defense attorney Mark Agnifilo, lead counsel, is going to deliver the defense closing. He said it would take about 3 hours. I wonder now if he goes a bit longer than that. But the defense did not call any witnesses and relied on cross-examination to poke holes in the accounts of the witnesses, look for him to repeat some of that, and to portray Cassie Ventura and Jane not as victims of sex trafficking, but as willing girlfriends who participated in Sean Combs's polyamorous lifestyle for years.
Aaron Kontursky there at the courthouse for us. Thank you so much, Aaron. Now to break down what we heard today, ABC News legal contributor Brian Buckmeyer is joining me. I'm curious what stood out to you.
I think what stood out to me and what probably stood out to a lot of people are all the different ways that Sean Combs can be found guilty, especially when it comes to that RICO conspiracy. Now, yesterday we talked about the fact that they just have to find 2 predicate acts. And it doesn't have to even be the same predicate acts. If we're jurors, I can believe it be bribery and obstruction of justice. You can believe it's arson and sex trafficking. But even further into that, AUSA Slavic said, you know what? If you think there are 2 times that Sean Combs gave drug to someone else and there's a RICO conspiracy, that's enough. And so even within those individual predicate acts, multiple ones of them could carry the day for them in that top charge.
How do you think that the prosecutor did today? Do you think she gave the jury a clear picture, a clear understanding of these charges, of this case?
I would probably use clear understanding, clear picture, but I'd probably go a little further, a roadmap. I think she gave them an excellent roadmap to say, if you follow these instructions, if you follow these facts, if you follow these elements, the only destination you can come to would be that Sean Combs is guilty of the charges. Talking about the RICO conspiracy, again, that only 2 needed to be done to find him guilty, as long as there's a criminal enterprise. But also the sex trafficking, that she conceded there might be some interaction between the 2 of them, especially talking about Jane, that first hotel night might have been consensual. But so long as there was 1 hotel night or 1 freak off or 1 king's night, whatever you want to call it, that's trafficking. And the simplicity of that and giving 3 great examples for both Jane and Cassie, I think really helped in creating that roadmap for the jurors.
Let's talk about the idea of criminal enterprise, because a lot of people watching all of this have been asking this question. Well, what was the goal of a criminal enterprise? Does it have to show some sort of goal?
I think this is the perfect definition that AUSA Slavic gave. And the goal is to force and manipulate Cassie Ventura and Jane to have sex with escorts for his own entertainment, and everything else was either to control them, meaning that arson of blowing up Kid Cudi's car allegedly to control Cassie to come back in, getting the drugs and distributing them to both Cassie and Jane to kind of ply them into doing this. The acts of violence, all of it, right? It was meant for this goal. And they're saying that there was a meeting of the mind, an implied agreement between those in his inner circle, being Sean Combs, to do this very goal.
The prosecutor told the jury that Combs was in charge and he had loyal lieutenants who made it all happen for him. Who were these people? Why does it matter? You know, Combs has pleaded not guilty to all of these charges. No one else has actually been charged.
Yeah, so Sean Combs, only defendant, as you described, right? When you're talking about loyal lieutenants, we're talking about Christina Coram and D-Rock, right? But also some of the security guards. And just to give you a heads up, this is just a few of them. We couldn't fit them all into a screen. But when we talk about foot soldiers, another thing that the AUSA talked about, we're talking about the assistants, right? Brendan Paul, Capricorn Clark, individuals who were not taking the lead, so to speak, in this criminal enterprise as the government is portraying it, but kind of did the marching orders, the setting up of the hotel nights, the getting the drugs, the things that facilitated many of these nights.
All right, Brian Buckmeyer, thank you so much for breaking that down with us. And with closing arguments in full swing, it won't be long before the case against Sean Combs finally goes to the jury. What will happen inside the closed doors of the deliberation room? Well, here to give us some insight into what that process may look like is Ross Suter. Ross is an attorney and jury consultant. He's joining us now from Pennsylvania. Ross, thank you so much for being here. You're not involved in this particular case, but you have studied juries for a while now, and I'm curious about those first couple of minutes that the jurors will get to spend together when they start deliberating. What do you expect that moment to be like?
Yeah, so they've had the opportunity to spend a lot of time together. They just have not been able to talk about the case. At least they're not supposed to be. So it is now their first opportunity to see where everybody stands, how they view the case, how they view guilt or innocence. And then they're going to start plowing through the evidence. There's obviously a lot of it. It's a 6-week trial with 34 or so witnesses. So there's a lot of information for them to start processing and getting into the group dynamic and start discussing, what do we think happened here? What's our viewpoint individually and then collectively as a group as to guilt or innocence?
Let's talk about the makeup of this jury. The youngest juror is just 30, the oldest 74. Some are from the city, others are from the suburbs. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, they're all going to have different viewpoints, obviously. They're all bringing different life histories to the table. It's really going to be part of what drives their viewpoint of the case individually. And I step away a little bit from just the actual age demographics and things like that into more, how do they see the world? How do they view this case? How I know during voir dire, there was a lot done about how people feel about celebrity and those type of issues. And now we have a jury panel of different individuals from different backgrounds, and they need to collectively now come together and come back to a group decision.
I'm curious because every witness that these jurors saw was called by the prosecutors. Do you think that will have surprised them, and how might that weigh into how they view this case?
I'm not sure if they'll be surprised per se. I know people generally understand that it's always the burden of proof on the prosecution. So the defendant doesn't have to put any evidence out there. And as it was stated earlier, their role was to punch holes in the evidence the prosecution was submitting into evidence. So it's a strategic, calculated risk to not put somebody up there, and you hope, or you're minimizing the risk by staying defensive, but still at the same time, you don't want that silence to be equated as to some type of admission of guilt.
Ross Suter, thank you so much for your insight.
Still
ahead, after more than 6 weeks of testimony about alleged sex, drugs, and violence, we're going to break down the prosecution's closing arguments. Stay with us. Welcome back. The Sean Diddy Combs trial is in its final phase. The prosecution delivering its closing arguments today, with the defense giving its summation tomorrow. Time to break down the strengths and weaknesses of the case the prosecution presented to the jury. We have ABC News legal contributors Brian Buckmeyer and Bernardo Villalona. Bernardo, let's start with you. What do you think were the strongest moments for the prosecution today?
Strongest moments for the prosecution, I think, is the way that they organized their closing arguments. That was the strongest point for me, because you were able to follow everything that the prosecutor was saying. But in terms of their strongest point, I think the strongest piece of evidence, when they showed the 27 men on the screen, these 27 escorts on the screen, in between of escorts that Cassie engaged in sex trafficking, the ones that Jane engaged in sex trafficking, and the ones that both of them engaged in sex trafficking. Literally, we were all counting each line to see how many men it was. But in terms of the prosecution, why I go into that their strength was how they organized it, because they broke down the racketeering conspiracy, and they broke down the predicate acts and told you which facts and evidence made out the predicate acts. So you got the arson, Kid Cudi, the bribery, the security officer from Intercontinental Hotel, the possession with intent to distribute, the multiple players having to deal with that. So breaking that down, and then also me going into forcing this jury to know that all they have to prove is just one predicate act. So, for example, the possession with intent to distribute. How many times did Sean Combs give drugs to Jane, to Cassie, or had Jane bring the drugs from California to Florida, or gave the packet of drugs to Brendan Paul, or anyone he gave drugs to? All it takes is one or two. You get two of those possession with intent to distribute, and you make out the racketeering conspiracy.
Brian, what did you think?
I think the organization was great. And the reason why I think it works out to their benefit is because what you want is that the jury gets into the deliberation room and they use your roadmap, not the other side's roadmap. And they march through the case in the way that you told them to. You give them the tools and the way to operate through it. And I think what's really going to help them out, and the defense will do the same thing as well, any good attorney does this, is you mirror the language of the charge that you know the judge is going to say later on. And so when you say it once and then the judge tells the jury, this is how you're supposed to look at the case, then they're like, oh wait, didn't Brian or Bernarda say this exact same thing? Maybe I should follow that direction. I think the organization is what really helped them here.
Yeah. The flip side of that, though, I'm curious, what do you think the weakest moments were?
For me, and maybe this is just my bias as a defense attorney, anytime a prosecutor makes a conclusory statement or say, well, you know that's true, and doesn't explain it, that to me gives me an opening to do some real damage as a defense attorney. So when you talk about the arson, does it seem like Sean Combs really did the arson? Absolutely. But they didn't give a lot of facts. It's like, well, you know he was part of it because there's no stuff that happened afterwards. So there's no other person who could have done it.
You had the email 2 weeks before, Cassie giving a heads up to her family member, like, look, I was threatened that he was going to release the videotapes, and he said that he's going to do something to Kid Cudi, and that he won't be in the country when it happens. And guess what? 2 weeks later, ding, ding, ding. Car is blowing up.
But you also know that Kid Cudi was with his ex-girlfriend's sister at the time. You also know that there's potentially female DNA on it. You don't know who Kid Cudi's dating also. That could have been the crazy ex-girlfriend there. You could have eliminated that as an option by giving facts to do so rather than just leaving it. The other thing, the voice note where Sean Combs says, you don't want me to ghost you. She says, oh, he says he doesn't want to ghost you because he's going to stop paying rent. How do you go from you don't want me to ghost you to he means I'm not paying rent? These are conclusions that they're making of their own that I think opens them up for a defense attorney to say, here are logical leaps that they're making that you don't have to, and this could raise reasonable doubt.
Or were there weak moments that you were concerned about?
In terms of the weak moment, well, one thing just stylistically, that she was reading from her binder when she was projecting this closing arguments to the jurors. I don't really like the reading part because I want to engage, have the eye contact, and have the jurors looking at me and me looking at them, and we're engaging in a conversation. But in terms of evidence that she put forth in her arguments, I think the one having to deal with Bana and Nia, because we know that those were the weak witnesses in a sense, not really Nia, but Bana, because of that issue of credibility, having to deal with being dangled from the 17th floor and that there was an issue with the date. But also in terms of not telling this jury how to evaluate credibility or believability, because they're taking for granted that just because I tell you this is the evidence and it's coming out of their mouth, that it's necessarily true. I think they should have explained to this jury, you're going to have to evaluate credibility of these witnesses. And this is how you evaluate credibility of these witnesses, what motive or bias or inconsistencies that they had, where you know that you can believe them because of the lack of motive or no inconsistency, or if there is an inconsistency, is a minor one. So those parts, because you do have the ones that it's corroborated, that's easy for a jury. A jury could be like, there's corroboration, so I believe that part of her testimony.
Do you think the defense tonight is tweaking what they were planning to do for trial?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I would be shocked if Mark Indiflo gets more than 4 hours of sleep tonight.
Right.
I think he should be getting the transcript as quickly as he can. And in situations like this, as a defense attorney, you better have had a great relationship with the court reporter who's making the transcript. And so you're coming to them and say, hey, when you're done, I don't care how raw or how unedited it is, I need that transcript because I'm going to go line by line, looking at those statements that Bernarda brought up, looking at those conclusory statements, bringing in other facts and say, this is where they're wrong. This is why their interpretation of this is wrong. And then trying to poke holes in that in many ways as possible that is unimpeachable, because at the end of the day, AUSA Comey is going to come up for that rebuttal.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. The government gets one more chance at this after the defense is done. Brian Buckmeyer, Bernarda Villalona, thank you both for being here with us. Coming up, a closer look at what people are saying about the trial that has captivated the nation's attention. Stay with us. Welcome back. As the Sean Diddy Combs trial nears the end, we want to know what people are saying about this high-profile case that's captivating the country. And here to help me answer that is YouTube star and our friend now, Tisa Tells, who has been at the Manhattan Federal Courthouse every day since the start of this trial, giving her more than 500,000 subscribers an inside look into this trial. Tisa, thanks so much for being here. I'm really curious, what are you hearing from the people who are following you?
So Listen, the people that are following me really, really wanted the prosecution to pull through. And there's been a lot on the media because no one's in the courtroom exactly. So you really are going off of everybody's opinion. But one thing, whether there were the people watching the live tweets from what was going on in the courtroom, listening to my perspective or anybody else's perspective, everybody is super happy and super impressed with the prosecution's closing arguments.
As far as what their comments look like at the beginning versus what they look like now, has that changed at all after hearing all of these witnesses?
Night and day. So in the beginning, people were saying, I don't see Rico. Where's the Rico? What's going on with the Rico? It was like hounding in the back of our heads. Nobody saw the Rico. However, of course, a lot of people, including myself, saw it early, but the vast majority of people did not see Rico. And even with the testimony, people were still like, I don't know, it seems suspicious. However, with these closing arguments, there is not one person, whether they support Diddy or not, saying they don't see a potential RICO case. So
you were in the courtroom.
Yeah.
Diddy's family was in the courtroom, so were his friends and his supporters. Give us sort of a view of what it was like in there today.
You know, it was actually kind of surreal, okay? You know, Diddy had what could be arguably called a few legal wins yesterday. And when he walked in, he seemed like he was in great spirits. That charm was on. He did his little love sign. He came in. He seemed like he was floating on top of the world. But as the prosecution's closing arguments kept moving forward, you saw his body language kind of slump a little. You saw him at one point, he was just looking straight. You know, and I get it. Somebody's saying that you're the devil and describing all these horrible things you did while your daughters are there and your kids are right behind you. I get it. But there was something more that he just started getting deflated to me as the prosecution kept making their closing argument. And again, it seemed like really good spirits. There was a packed house. Usually in the last couple of weeks, those rows for family have been pretty sparse. They've only been utilized about 20%. Today it was a packed house. But again, the high spirits they came in with kept getting lower and lower as the prosecution kept moving forward.
Content creators like yourself have really been giving people a different viewpoint, a different way to follow these kinds of trials. I'm curious the feedback that you have gotten as you've done this.
You know what? I've gotten a lot of really good feedback, but I think it's because the Southern District of New York, they don't let cameras in. So you really do need someone with their eyes and ears. And you guys do a great job of that. But you know, you guys have set times that you can come on. So we've kind of filled a niche where it's like, yeah, I'll see you on break. I'll see you on lunch. And it's up to the minute. But they really like having us there as a fly on the wall, as a real person who doesn't really understand the legal side, but you're doing your best to figure it out. And you're literally just going off of the body language, what you see, what people are thinking and feeling. It's been an incredible outpouring of support, but you know what? I am trying to be the coverage that I wish I could see too. Like, let me know exactly what's going on. Oddly enough, the content creators, you might be the reason why the Southern District of New York changes their policies about having video.
We would all like to have some cameras in the courtroom. Do you have any plans for what you're going to do next? You know, because this has been weeks. Yes, it has been weeks, but now I have this live trial bug in me that I just can't get out. I'm thinking about covering the Idaho 4. Of course, everybody is looking for the cutie patootie Luigi Rangione trial to go forward, and also just covering more court cases. But one thing is true. I think the fallout from the Diddy verdict, no matter what it is, I think it's going to be something that really has shockwaves for the next couple of weeks. You know, both sides, of course, feel super strongly, but the shockwaves of what it means for the rap industry, what it means for the record industry, and just what it means for society and people commenting about whether he got a raw deal or not, I think it's going to be weeks. Tisa, thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you. It's always great seeing you. And thank you for joining us. We'll be here tomorrow for the defense's closing arguments and for verdict day. The show streams right here on ABC News Live, Disney Plus, and Hulu, weekdays at 5:30 p.m. Eastern and Pacific. For even more on the Diddy trial, make sure to follow our podcast, Bad Rap, The Case Against Diddy. It's hosted by our very own Brian Buckmeyer, wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Eva Pilgrim in New York. Have a good rest of your day.